Um, first of all, are you guys good? All of this is like, you can see what's up here. Cool. So we are going to pick up right where Chris left off, where we had this great project where we are recording all of our spells. But what we're going to do is we're going to add in now like a user capability. So it's interesting that he kind of wrote it this way, of that we see all my spells listed here. But really, these are all of anyone's spells. You could access this app and add spells to it, and they would show up on this list as well. It's not really just what I added. And part of your Sinatra project and what we'll be going to is you want the ability to control, these are my things, those are your things. I can only edit my things. You can only edit your things. And there's this protection. In order to have that protection, we have to have a way to authenticate our users when they sign up and when they log in. So we need that kind of basic functionality that you see in almost all websites you visit these days, logging out and logging in. Also, sorry, I just muted you if your sound was on, but you can always unmute yourself to say something at any point. So this was what was created at the last moment with that Cornel gem. I want us to start a little bit more from scratch, and so I'm going to get rid of a few of these. We'll get rid of through the edit, because we're not going to talk about editing our users today. And we are going to use our wizards as our users, because one thing that I do want to make clear through this is that we will use the term user quite frequently to be who we're authenticating. But you can make that model to be whatever you want. You could make it be a teacher, a wizard in this case, or whoever else is going to be the person using your app. And so the first thing that we'll need to do, as you've done for probably every single Sinatra lab, is we'll need to set up the table. When we left off last time, Chris had run the Cornel generate wizard, and it did give us a migration, but nothing in it. So that's where we'll start today. When thinking about a user, what are the attributes that seem to be important if you wanted to be able to sign someone up, log them in, log them out? Let me see the chat. Username, email, password. Perfect. Those are kind of your standard things that come up. You don't have to have all three: username, email, password. But you do for sure have to have a password, and you have to have something that is a unique identifier that logs you in. And I do want to emphasize that it must be a unique identifier. We'll look at that later, what happens if they're not the same. But if we were simply to do name, we could run into issues because we might have two wizards that are both named Harry. And they would have trouble accessing their separate accounts because they have the same name. So we would want something unique, which is why a lot of sites use usernames or emails, which are also pretty unique.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Hi, Alex. Are you talking to us?
To
I don't think he's talking to us. I'm going to mute him. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we will set this up as a string for our username. We'll go ahead and give him an email too. I did that backwards. And then finally, the other part that we'll need is a password. Now, I know a lot of you guys, when I asked at the beginning, most of you haven't gotten there yet. Is there anyone here who has taken a look at how we deal with passwords when we authenticate users? I see. A very special word coming out. Password digest from Brandon and Anna. Would either of you guys mind kind of unmuting yourself and explaining what a password digest is in very brief terms?
Briefly, I believe it's part of our session hash. I'm not exactly sure how it's handled, but I know it's part of the session hash.
Okay, so I'm actually really glad that you said that, Brandon, because I've done a bunch of Sinatra assessments, and most people actually do think that the password digest and the session hash are related because they get brought up in similar lessons. They're actually not, but similar things happen in both situations. So the fact that you said that is completely reasonable, and I've had like 90% of students come through say something similar to me. So what's happening is Password Digest is a way to store an encrypted password. So if you are, if you make a terrible password and just say like ABC123, something like that, what it's going to look like in the database is like a scrambling of like letters and numbers and symbols. And I don't actually know if there's symbols in there, but it's going to be like a scrambled, you have no idea what it actually is. And the encryption services that we use actually, you were right, Brandon, to say a hash. They actually store it in terms of a hash. And Chris has a pretty cool video that I think he'll send out later in the Slack channel that talks about one tech company that uses lava lamps and the positioning of the lava lamp to encrypt their passwords at that moment. But basically, Password Digest, and I think, let me see what Lucy put, is a column on our table that's going to store the encrypted password, which is exactly right. And actually, it came out like 2 years ago, I think, that Facebook, half of their passwords were not stored encrypted, which is kind of crazy. But a general first step as a programmer is you never store a raw string password in a database, because anyone could look at the database, and most of us users tend to reuse passwords, which is a really bad practice, but we do it anyways. And so you wouldn't want someone to be able to hack into a database and find your raw string password. You would want them to see something that's nonsensical. And the really cool thing is actually, because people do use common passwords, let's say we have 3 users that have all used this same password, it's actually going to be encrypted differently for each person. So it's not going to look the same, like this one might be some other crazy combination. They're not going to look the same in the way that they are encrypting them. I don't know all of the ins and outs of how they get encrypted. I just know that they've done it in a way so you can't look and be like, clearly this must be password, because password's the #1 most common used password, or something like that, because they see it is used over and over again. So Password Digest is what we will put in our database basically from here on out once you get to this section, and it is how we will store our encrypted password. Password Digest, in order for it to work, there are a few other pieces that we must include. One of those pieces that we must include is a gem that gives us the ability to do the encryption. You don't have to worry about doing any of the encryption. This gem, bcrypt, will do it for you. And so it'll be super important you add this to your gem file. The Cornell gem actually comes with it included, but if that were not the case, you would need to add this and then bundle install. This is where we have the ability to encrypt our passwords. There's one other piece that we must include. Anyone who's worked through that section, do you know what else we have to include in order to get Password Digest to work correctly? It's okay if you don't. I think a lot of us are just getting to that section. Yes. So we need to go to, exactly, you guys are on it. So we need to go to our wizard model, and we need to tell our wizard model that he has a secure password. And so it looks something like this. And what we're doing here is we're actually just using a macro. You were on it, Jesse, with has secret password. The right idea was there. What this is basically doing is this is an active record macro that is bringing in a whole bunch of code with one line. It is giving us a few methods, and some of the methods that it's giving us, for example, is it is giving us an authenticate method that we'll be able to use later. It's also giving us a password equals method. So it's creating a writer for a password equals. Even though we don't have a password in the database, it's going to allow us to take in a raw string password, and then it will hash it and set our password digest. And so it does all this cool stuff where it's going to take care of the encryption for us. It's worth taking a look at the documentation for Has Secure Password and really diving deep into seeing all of the pieces that it does. It also by default, and if we have time, we'll get to it today. If not, I'll maybe just put some resources in the chat about it or the Slack. But it also includes some validation. So it has a built-in way where it validates that you must have a password. Because if we're asking them to do has secure password, then we want them to then for sure we don't want them to sign up without a password. So it has some automatic validations in it. So it's a pretty powerful line of code to just put has secure password there. Okay, cool. We've got our basic setup. It's a lot going on just to get it set up correctly, and then we'll actually see what happens when we sign up and log in. And so our migration looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and run our migration. We'll do our RakeDB migrate. And I actually don't think I have Shotgun running. So we'll do it in this tab. We'll go ahead and run Shotgun, and then we'll start adding in the other pieces that we need. So let's make sure our schema, good. We now have a wizards table and we have a spells table. The next piece that we're gonna need is we want some way that a user could actually log in. So right now, anyone can see this spells page. It would probably be better if you could only see the spells page after you had logged in. And so that's one of the first pieces that we're gonna add. Actually, we'll do sign up before login, because you can't log in unless you've signed up for an application. So coming over here, and some of you guys might not have gotten here yet. You might be using Sinatra still, where there's just one controller. For the purpose of separation of concerns, typically for every model that we deal with, they have their own controller. So the code dealing with signing up is really going to be creating a new wizard, just like before we were creating a new spell, which means that we're going to want to put this in the wizard's controller, and we're essentially going to be using these two routes. One thing to keep in mind is usually when you go to websites, you don't type in like users/new to sign up. Usually what you see in the browser up here is something a little more similar to just /sign up. And for that reason, we might adjust this to actually say /sign up instead of wizards new. Just for ease of this GET request is what our user is gonna see, and it might feel a little bit more natural to them to see the words sign up here. That's up to you. You can handle it however you would like, but typically this is the way you'll see it, is actually written out as a sign up route. And so this is still the route that will lead to creating a new wizard. We can still render the wizard's new template, but we'll just rename it to be sign up. So once we have that, we'll actually want to go to the corresponding view. And so we'll go ahead and do what Cornel gave us, and we'll go to the wizard's new page. And we aren't going to edit today, so I'm going to just delete that one. And so in here, we'll just do a basic form, and we'll say sign up here. Now, when we start with filling out this form, where should we send the form? When we submit it, where should we send it? And there are potentially two right answers here. That is one of the right answers. Yes, Jesse, we could just send it to /wizards and follow our RESTful routing conventions of we're creating a new wizard. Brandon, we will eventually take them to Wizard Show. Once we sign up, we will then go to the Wizard Show, but more so asking where is this going to post to. And actually, this kind of brings up a good point with both what Brandon and Lucy are saying, and you might be thinking in the long term, we do want them to go to the show page, but if we haven't created the object yet, that object doesn't have an ID. And so if that object doesn't have an ID, we can't actually send this form to wizards / whoever that wizard is until they've been created. So for right now, we would either send it to wizards, or you'll see in some of the labs, they actually will just call it sign up because it is submitting to a sign up. So we kind of break our RESTful routing conventions a little bit when we deal with sign up. It doesn't matter what you put here as long as you put the matching thing in your controller. So if we put this as sign up, and we'll just do it like that for clarity, this is a form, so it will be a post request. That would mean that in our controller, instead of post wizards, we'll call this post sign up. So this will be where we sign up. Is that kind of confusing to put us here? I don't know why that says correct. We'll put some stuff there. Okay. So just trying to make it a little bit more clear as we're going to break convention just so we make it really obvious which ones are our sign up routes. Nelson, were you going to ask a question?
Sorry, no.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just thought maybe you unmuted yourself for that reason. Cool. We'll also go through and we'll just add inputs like we have in all of our other forms. We've got our username one, which will just be text. And then let me give a little line break in here so it doesn't get messy. We'll do another input field for email, and we'll do another one for password. One thing that throws people off a little bit is, remember in our database, we called this password digest. Everywhere else in our app, we will call it password. The reason for that is because that macro has secure password. We'll always be transforming what we call password into password digest for the database. If you say password digest equals, you'll screw up everything, because then we'll actually set password digest to be the raw string password. Instead, we always use just password and let Active Records has secure password do the transformation or the encryption for us. So that's just a really important thing to remember. The only place we write password digest is in our migration files. Everywhere else is just password. And then finally, we would want a submission form. And so we'll say submit, and we'll put this value as sign up. Now there's going to be one.
Is there any difference on using the type for the password, the type text or the type password?
Yes, and I'm so glad you asked that, Bruno. That was what I was about to cover, and I didn't put any labels.
Okay.
So this looks quite silly. Yeah, so Bruno brought up a really great point, and that is right now when we type into all of these, they're going to all look the same. They're all just text fields, and because this takes a while to, like if I type in my password, you can see it. If I type in my email, nothing, I mean, you won't really see the email part yet, but they all just look the same. And what we want is we would like this to really be little stars. And so I like to change this type to password. And one little hack that I'm just going to show you guys, because it has been a lifesaver for me when I forget my password, is you can always inspect the page and use your dev tools. And you can actually, like, if you're on a live site, like not like Shotgun, but you're on a live site where you forgot your password and your password is stars, you actually can go in to the form and you can change this from password to text to reveal your password. And it will update the change. So like, let's say we went to a site and your password pre-populated and you're like, oh, I really need to know it because I need to look the login for my phone. You can go in and you can change this to text and it will show your password. So for security purposes, it's not a great thing to have your computer remember your password, because even though it might keep it as like some pretty cool stars, it's not really like preventing that much at the end of the day. Email, there also is a type for email, which is kind of cool. And what it's going to do by default is if I try to hit sign up right now, because this is an email field, it's not going to let me. It's going to say, please include an @ in the email field. It doesn't like totally check that your email works. It also is not a protection against your database. I really want to like emphasize that. These are what I would call front end protections. And they make a user's life easier because they don't submit bad data, but they all are easily removed. As you just saw, we could change that field pretty easily. And like if something here was preventing me from signing up, I could easily just change it by inspecting the page. And so we will change these because it is much better to put the type as email and password. And that's how our page will look. One other piece of useful information, you can go through and there is an attribute called required. You will see this at some point. And what this is going to do, I should have waited to refresh, is it's going to prevent us from signing up unless something is filled in here. Is that finished loading? So we'll see. There we go. So it'll give us this please fill out the field. I want to emphasize that to meet your requirements for the Sinatra project, this does not actually prevent bad data from entering your database. Because again, let's say I was really nifty and I just wanted to like hack your site and I didn't want you to know my username or email. I can go in here and I can remove that, and I could remove this, and then I would be able to sign up with it being blank. And nothing's really going to happen right now when I do sign up. We're just going to go to a weird space because we haven't done anything in our controller to process that sign up. But I just wanted to kind of emphasize that.
Okay, there's one thing just so you can refresh your mind real quick. Before I was doing this program, I was doing another one like just online, and they said that there's this type password that will make it all stars, and there's another type that you can put there or something like this that you'll make the last character appears. You know, when you type in, if you type like A, B, C, always the last character will show when the rest will like changing to stars, you know.
I actually
just,
don't
know something simple, just so I can refresh my mind. But if you don't, that's fine.
I don't know off the top of my head. I will look it up though and get back to you on it because I'm sure I could find it from Googling, and that's kind of cool. I didn't realize there was.
Yeah, I can have a look as well. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Cool. No problem. Thanks for bringing that up. So now we'll go ahead and we will kind of deal with processing this form request. I'm going to work off of your guys' preference here. Would you rather I namespace these, or do we want to just leave them as username, email, and password? We have a vote.
I wouldn't mind saying namespace.
Okay, that's kind of the like more, I would say it's the better way to do it, but it's also a little bit harder. So not harder, both harder and easier at the same time. So we'll leave it as namespaced. And so this is just giving our params a little bit more structure and keeping them a little bit more secure of saying all of these things are for our wizard signing up. So now let's go ahead and we will, let's stop here and let's take a look at our params and let's deal with signing up. So we'll go back to the get sign up page and deal with that as well. Cool, so let's put in a username and then I'm gonna type in password. I'm telling you this so we don't forget later that it's just password as the password. Perfect, so we're in our pry and we can take a look at what our params are. And you'll see that they're all namespaced under wizard. And so params wizard will give me a hash of the key and value coming through. And one of the things that you guys worked on before with Chris when we were creating new spells is if we namespace it like this, we can actually say wizard.new and we can just type in params wizard because it's the same thing as typing in username pointing to params wizard username. Like it's sending through this exact hash. So it's doing the same thing as doing it the long way. So we can go ahead and hit enter and we will have a new wizard. Just so you can take a look, here's our password digest, very unrecognizable from password. I actually am curious, let's just create another wizard because I want to show you. So it does start the same for both of these, but if you notice, it is not the same the whole way through, and that's because they add extra stuff to it. They salt it and hash it so that it's unrecognizable and that these two are not going to be matches, which is just kind of cool if you think about it in the long term. So in our sign up route, there's a few things that we'll need to do. The first thing that we will want to do, we're going to go, I've thought about there's kind of like two ways we can tackle this. One, we do want to make sure that they gave us good info. So we do want to have some sort of check that the fields are filled in. We also want some sort of check that the username isn't taken. And this is going to be, you have a little bit of a choice as a developer, what you want to be that unique identifier as they log in I personally really hate logging into websites with my email. That might just be me. I don't like typing out my email. I don't mind typing in my username, so I tend to use username for login. It's up to you. The big thing is, whatever you use for your login, it needs to be a unique thing for each individual. So you'll want to have some sort of check in your sign up to make sure that the username isn't taken. And then finally, if it passes all of those checks, then we will create a new wizard. We're going to log them in. I'll talk about what that is in a second. And then we will send them on their way or redirect them to a show page. So that will kind of be like our process that we go through. Let's kind of handle this one step at a time. So if we're going to check that something is true or not, we'll probably need an if statement. How could I check to make sure that these params wizard are filled in? Oh, we got some code in here. I like it. Okay, so we could do something like if, and we could do it as an unless statement as well, but I'm going to copy and paste your code. We can basically go through each one and check that they're filled in. So if this one is empty, or if the other one is empty, or if this would be email, or if the params password is empty, then we'll want to send them away. So we'll want to send them somewhere else. Let me give my else if in here for my next statement. So if any of those things are true, we'll want to send them away. So I'll say redirect back to the sign up page because they did it wrong. There are a few other ways to do it. I like that. Lucy, I was going to say there is a shorter way of doing this. What we really care about here is we care about, why did I get rid of my params? Oh, because I put wizards. What we really care about is the values. So we care about Jen12313, then my email and my password. We care that those are filled in. And so we really care to see if any of those are an empty string. I tend to write it, and there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. So this way works. We want to do it a little bit shorthand. Let me just comment this out so people know that that is an option to write it out that way. We could also do if params wizard dot values, and I tend to do any, and the only reason I do this is because I like to be able to use like dot empty or dot blank, because it covers a little bit more than just if it's an empty string, although honestly it should always be coming in as an empty string. So there are a few different ways to handle it, or we could say dot blank, where this is just going to check to see if any of those values are blank. Or we could use include like you have in there, Lucy. This is a really cool check that works really well when we start namespacing things, because you might have a situation where you only care about the wizard params being filled in, and then you have other params that are kind of optional. This also only works if you care about all three fields being filled in, which we do here. So it works really nicely. What is this thing doing there? So we've got our first part done. If they didn't fill in all the fields, we're going to send them back to the sign up because they messed up. Else if they use a username that is already taken. So how would we know if that username was already in the system? This one's kind of a little bit trickier to think about. And you guys are welcome to talk out loud too. You don't just have to put it in the chat. It will involve a find by, yes. We will want to see, is that username in the database? And so basically we can do if the wizard.find by, why can't I write? Our username is params. And remember, this is namespace, so it is going to take a little bit of, we have to do wizard and then username. But basically, if we can find the wizard And the way this will work is this will return a truthy value if it is found. It will return a nil, which is considered a falsy value if it is not found. So if it is found, we'll go into this else if. If it's not found, it'll continue to run. So we can say else if we found the wizard, and this is, I'm gonna put this with our else if here. Then we wanna do the same thing. We'll just redirect them back to sign up. You could potentially see me combining both of these two statements into the same one since they're gonna do the same thing. Or you could write it in the converse where we check to make sure it passes all of them. And if it passes all of them, we sign them up, else we redirect them. There's like a lot of different ways that you can handle it. But for our else, this means that we passed all of our checks and that we're ready to create a new wizard. And so this is where we can say wizard.create params wizard. There are some active record validations out there, and you're more than welcome to use active record validations. They will be covered in depth in the next section, which is why we do it a little bit different here. One word to note, if you do use active record validations, you still need some logic in your controller that says if the wizard is valid, do this. If it's not valid, do that. So you still have to always have some sort of check in your controller to make sure that good data was entered. The validations don't let you just skip that. Just wanted to add that as a point. So that's creating a new wizard. What does it mean to log someone in?
Just 1 second. For the validation that you said when you do it on the active record, because I'm done with this part and I haven't done this way, and I'm actually for the validate username uniqueness and presence and things like this. But on the post, is it the like user.save a validation for this?
Yeah, so if you were to use validations, it would your code would look a little bit more like
creating a user like a wizard equals the @user, no?
Yeah, it would look something like this, and then you would say if wizard. You could either do if wizard.valid or if wizard.save.
Okay, because the save has some validations like built in on it, yes?
Because save will use your validations in the model. Save will run your validations in the model. But it is still important that you have this control flow logic and you don't simply just do create.
Just create,
Create will also run the validations and the validations will fail, but you don't, and it could be that your code kind of works, but it might be that your app is sending them to the show page and then realizing that they're not logged in, so it's sending them back. And you don't want all these extra redirects. You want the logic in your post that says, if it saves, go on. If it doesn't, go back, basically.
Okay. And there's one thing, because I've seen on your controller, when you're like creating the wizard.new params wizard there, and it's giving the ID new on the create and update it as new as well. Is that because you're not saving, let's say?
Yeah, so the only reason it was nil here is because both of those times I did .new.
Okay.
If I had done .create, it would have saved. I just didn't want to do .create in my pry because I wanted my actual code to So actually, I think we can do it here for this one because we've already passed this. So now it will actually give us all of that
Give us the ID. Okay.
Yes. Good call. Okay, so we've created a new wizard. Now that we have a new wizard, we need to log them in. And logging them in brings up something that Brandon mentioned a lot earlier, is that we have to use a session, which is basically a way that your computer will use cookies to store information about whether you've like been to that site or not, and will store information about your unique computer and you having logged in. For the sake of our sessions right now, all we're going to store is just information about the user who just logged in. But in order for us to use sessions, we have to set them up. And so we'll go to our application controller and we'll add here, we'll give it some code to tell it that we want to be using sessions. And there is a little bit more in the curriculum to read about sessions. I'm kind of going quickly over it because there's a lot to cover in this lecture. And then we also want to set a session secret. And this is the part that I think confuses a lot of people with the password, session secret. And because what we're doing here is we want our session to be encrypted. And so what we do is we give it like some secret code word. Normally this would actually not live right here in the code base, like we wouldn't hard code it in, but for the purposes right now of our Sinatra project, this would be like our super secret code word, we'll say. And so it'll just be some word in there. I don't know if these actually all need to, just in case they need to be attached, we're going to attach them. I don't think they do though. But this is basically a word that they're going to use in the encryption to salt and hash your session so that a malicious user couldn't hack into your session and see the info that is stored there. That is the purpose of this set session secret. It has nothing to do with the password digest. And I think they all feel very connected, but they are two separate ways that we are dealing with encryption. One, we encrypt our password, and in this one, we encrypt our session so that someone couldn't sneak in and see what is in our session. I do believe I'm gonna have to restart, and that secret, yes, Anna, this can be anything you want for right now. Normally it would be like, you mention like you would reference an env file that is local to your computer and doesn't get pushed to GitHub so that it can like be a super secret thing that other people don't see. But right now we just put whatever we want there. And so because we just started sessions, I'm gonna actually kill my server and we're gonna restart it because we need to deal with a session for the rest of this. So our session is actually just gonna be a hash, and all our session does is it is a hash where we can store key and value pairs. And so the way that we consider logging someone in is we look at the session hash and we add a key to the session hash, and we'll call it user ID. Because it's wizards here, I could have called it wizard ID. That's up to you. I just am really used to calling this user ID, and I need that there. And I'm gonna set it equal to whatever my wizard ID was here. Actually, it might be easier to call this wizard ID. We'll call it wizard ID for this moment. And so I want to get back to this page because I want us to check this one more. I want to just make sure that this is working. And then first, let's actually make sure that our validations are, oh, yep, these are those silly ones that I put in there. We've already put in this username. So let's see what happens when we sign up with that same username. If we've done it correctly, it'll bring us back to this page. Beautiful, ideal world, we would have error messages, but that's for another time. And so let me sign up just as something else. And we'll do password again as our password. And we should now hit our binding pry. Beautiful. And we'll just take a look at our session. And so you can see here, there's a lot of information that is what Sinatra is using to keep track of the session, like our session ID and those pieces. But we did add to it our nice little wizard ID. And so anytime we want to figure out if someone's logged in or not, we can basically ask them, do you have a wizard ID? And it will give us our number 2 back, which should be the ID of the last wizard that we just created. Perfect. After we have done this, where should we send them? And this is kind of up to us. Well, I guess I said redirect them to the show page. How would I redirect them to the show page? What does that code look like? My tabs are very off. Sorry about that, guys. Go ahead and give it to us. Thank you, Brandon. So we'll redirect to wizards, and then we'll actually play in this wizard ID. We could now technically be using the session ID, but that's not really necessary. And I don't know why that doesn't look like it's interpolating, but that should be interpolating. And we'll now have redirected them to their show page. Before we go to the show page, I'm gonna just add in the code here to make sure that this works. And that, actually, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna just use the fact that we now have sessions to show something on the show page. So let's come over here and say the current wizard is, and this is a really bad practice. We're going to refactor this out because you don't want to reference the database in your views, but I just want to show you that this will work. We are going to find by ID, and we'll do session wizard ID. So we're just basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use the session, and that's kind of hard to see in separate lines. So we're going to use the session to find who the current wizard is, and then we're going to display their username. So this should give me one wizard object based on the session wizard ID. So it's whoever is our currently logged in person. So let's go ahead and get out of the pry. And I don't think it's going to take us to the show page because we hadn't added that in before I got rid of the pry. So let's just go to wizards/2. Nice. And this isn't a true show page at the moment, because if I go to wizards/1, it's still going to say the current wizard is stars 1, 2, 3. This is what I would consider to be more of like a profile page or a home page, because we're just dealing with the current wizard. We're not dealing with anything else. So now we do have a few other little pieces we need to add in, and one other issue, and that is if I go back to the sign up page. Yes, that is true, Brandon. Thanks. That's a good point. Is because if you notice when I did in the controller, here I use double quotes and here I use single quotes. Doesn't really matter which one you use unless you're interpolating. And then you have to use your double quotes. So it might just be a better practice to always use double quotes when routing, just so you don't forget that you need them for interpolating. Thank you for that reminder. So if you go back here, it looks like we could sign up again, which just seems kind of weird because we're already logged in. Like we can go back to that wizards page and it's going to show that we're logged in. And so we need a few things to have happen here. One, and the first and most important one, is we want to make sure that we can log out. The other thing that we want to make sure we do is that we don't see this page if we're already logged in. So let's handle logging out first. And there is a little bit of you can put the logout route where you want. In all reality, it probably should go in a sessions controller, where our sessions controller just deals with logging in and logging out. That's how you'll handle it in Rails. For the moment, if you would like to add it to your users controller because it's logging a user out, that's okay. Or if you want to add it to your application controller, that's fine as well. So I'm going to leave that a little bit up to you. For now, we will put it in our wizards controller, just for ease and simplicity. So these tabs are very off, and I apologize. For now, we will also make it a get route. It will not later on be a get route, but for our purposes and simplicity of Sinatra, we will use our logout as a get route. And then in here, the only things that we need to do is we just want to basically clear the session. So we're going to reset the session so we get rid of the person who is in there. So we simply put session.clear, and then we'll want to send them back to a home page. So I might redirect them to the sign up page or to the login page. Either one should be able to handle that. And actually, just so we have a better idea of what's happening, I'm going to put this code, I'm going to put it on the layout so that it shows up on every single page. We'll put it in like maybe some H2 tags. So if you ever want something to show up on every page, just put it in your layout. Because now we'll have a better idea if someone's logged in or not.
I have a couple of questions. Don't know if it's a good time. The first one is pretty quick. It's the sessions.clear.
Yes.
A couple of times I've just tried writing session and then setting it equal to an empty hash. And one time it worked and one time it didn't. And I have no idea why it worked or didn't work. So that's kind of like my more basic question. My other question, I think, might be more of like me misunderstanding something conceptual. It's about when I was reading about cookies, it kind of made it seem like the user, like the browser, the user's browser always has to send a cookie when you go to a new page, or else the server won't know that it's still you using it. And I just don't know. I'm confused about how that comes in because it doesn't really seem like that's what's happening here. It seems like the user logs in once, and then their ID goes in the sessions hash, and then we assume that it's them until they log out. So I guess I'm curious. I'm confused about how cookies are like entering into the picture here.
Yes, so cookies are like a whole nother, I feel like, rabbit hole that honestly I probably need to read more about. So I also am cautious of I don't want to tell you anything wrong. But if you think about like tons of people using this same site at the same time and wanting their everyone wanting their code to work correctly, or like for my computer to know that I'm the current wizard and for your computer to know that you're the current wizard, you do have to, the cookies is storing information about your browser so that it knows that this session exists and stays the same for your browser, but this session is different for Lucy's browser.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
That actually clears it up, I think, because
Okay.
I thought it was about, oh, so it's about like finding which session is associated with you.
Yes.
And then the session knows who you are. Okay,
Yes.
that makes a lot more sense. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Any advice on the session clear slash
I'm curious. We're gonna put a binding pry here and take a look. We'll take a look at it here. Yeah, there are also like cookies for like saying you want to keep this for longer and like remember you for, there's lots of different cookies is like a whole nother subtopic that I think is a interesting thing to go down the rabbit hole in, that I honestly haven't probably spent enough time going down that rabbit hole. But I'm like, I know they work and this is using cookies, so that's good for me. But so we'll go ahead and we'll test our logout route, but we're gonna do a binding pry, and I just wanna take a look at what happens when we do session clear, because I'm curious. I don't know if it clears all of the, oh, it does. It really sets it just to be a blank hash. The only thing I could say, Lucy, and I'm not positive, is that even though this just looks like a blank hash, it might have been that when you set it equal to an empty hash, you were overriding something about the enable sessions, like you were breaking something about enable sessions. Not sure if that's it at all. It might have been like a fluke that it wasn't working. I would say continue testing it out, but because it is just going to an empty hash.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I'll just keep trying. I mean, it's possible that it just worked because it didn't work because I spelled something wrong or something. Who knows? So
yeah. Yeah, that one, it's a little tricky to know what is going on there, but we should be logged out and no method error at sign up. Redirect to, did I spell that wrong? Oh, this is my bad. It's because I wrote this out and that we're no longer logged in, which I should have put a protection in for that. So I tried to do this one other time and we didn't have active record yet, so it didn't work yet. But now we can do try, where it will try to run it if it can. If it can't, it will not run that method, just to save us. So there is no current wizard at the moment. Because there's no current wizard at the moment, we could sign up again, or we could log in. Man, I'm sorry guys, I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit because we need to get through all of this. So I'm gonna add a new file to our wizards, and we'll call it our login.html.erb. Again, this could be in a separate folder that's just your sessions folder. for our sake right now, we're going to keep it with wizards. And for login, it's going to be almost the same as your sign up. There's going to be one big change, and that's we don't need them to put in both their username and their email. Instead, we only need the one that we've checked for uniqueness on. So if you have checked for uniqueness on email, you would leave that. We checked for uniqueness on username, so we will leave the username. And now we'll change this to login. And the nice thing is once you've done this form once, now you pretty much have it set up. And we'll also want to add a route for it in the controller. So similar to this one, we'll come down here and we'll add another get route. And we'll call it get login. And this one, all we're basically going to do is render the login page. So let's make sure that works. And then similarly, we'll need to process the login page. And processing the login page is a little bit different than our sign up. Because processing the login page, we need to make sure that they gave us the correct login. Oh, that is one other thing I need to change on the form is where it's posting. We need to make sure that they gave us a valid username. And then we need to make sure, did they give a valid password? So those are two things that we're checking. So it's a little bit different than what we checked when they were signing up. So let's go back to that form for a moment and we'll change this to login. Let me refresh this page because if I don't refresh this page, it won't update those changes that I just added here. And then I'll go ahead and we will log in and we're gonna stop in a binding pry right here so we can take a look at what's happening. I think I used that as a username. In both of them I did password, so we should be okay. And so we can take a look at our params here. They still are nested just because I copy and pasted them over. So remember when you try to get to anything, you'll need to put wizard in front of it. So if we want to access their username, it'll look something like this. And first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to make sure they gave us a valid username. The nice thing is we kind of already did this when we checked to make sure that the username wasn't taken. It's a pretty similar step. In both cases, we'll want to see if the wizard is there. But this time, if the wizard is there is a good thing. So we'll say this is our found wizard, is whoever they find. And we want to check, oh, let's make it a singular wizard. We want to check if the wizard was found. So it'll look something like if wizard. You can put the bang signs in front of it if you want to like turn it to a truthy value. But if Ruby works in a pretty smart way where if it like evaluates, if it's going to evaluate to a true value like it exists, it will be true. If it does not, if it's nil, it will be false. So you don't necessarily have to put the double bangs in front of it. You can if it makes you feel better about it. But we'll basically say if the wizard exists, then we'll want to check for their password. And checking for their password is a little bit different because we are using has secure password. There is no way that I can compare this password with the password that is associated to this wizard on my own. So there's no way I can compare that to password. Just wouldn't be able to do it. Because of that, has secure password gives us something that checks for us. And it is called the authenticate method. So the way we typically write this code is we'll say, if we found the wizard and the wizard has authenticated their password. So we'll say wizard.authenticate. And all we want to pass in here is the password. We don't pass in like a hash or anything like that. We just pass in the raw string password. And so instead of username here, this will say password. And what it looks like down here is it should give us either an object back or it will give us a false. So let's say I put in hello, which is the wrong password. We'll get false back. So it either is giving us a truthy value of our object, or it's giving us a false for it did not authenticate. The really nice thing about writing it like this as well is the way a double and works. If the first thing it evaluates is false, it does not evaluate the second half. And so this is a nice way of writing it. Like, it's not even going to try to check the password if we didn't find a wizard. And there would actually be some error messages that you get if you don't have a wizard and you try to use .authenticate, because you'll get no method error .authenticate for nil value because wizard was not found. And so this is the way that you would want to handle both of those checks at once. And so if this happens, then they are a valid wizard. They like successfully logged in. And so we need to log them in and send them on their way. If you remember, the way we log them in is we just set the session to be their user ID. If I could spell wizard, wizard.id. And then we would want to redirect them as well. And I'm going to copy and paste this from before because we're going to redirect them to the same spot. And then otherwise, we would want to send them back to the page that they came from. One thing that you'll notice, and this should be a common practice in your Sinatra application, is, let me change this to password, is in a Sinatra application when we have a post route, notice you rarely are going to be showing ERB forms. Instead, what you're going to be doing is you'll be redirecting them back to a get route. And that's just kind of the way that we handle them in Sinatra. It's a little bit different in Rails, but kind of a similar thing is whenever we post, we're just processing information and then we're redirecting them on somewhere else. Yes, Ivana, I will share those things with you. I don't have access. I don't have the presentation, but I'll ask Chris to get it and share that with you all, because I know that would be useful to have. So let's go back to that login page and let's just try logging in one more time to make sure this works. And then there's one last thing I wanted to cover, but I'd rather get questions. So, oh, did I not take out my binding pry? It's okay, it'll work because we have the rest of the code in there. And so we should go to our show page. Perfect, and it says the current wizard is Gen 12313, which is exactly what we were hoping to find. Any pressing questions that you guys have? There are so many things I still didn't get to cover. If there are no pressing questions, the one last thing that I did want to show you is you're going to find that you're going to want to know who the current wizard is many, many, many times. And you'll end up using this same code over and over and over again. And instead of using that, we really want to make it a helper method. You could call it current user or current wizard. And there are multiple ways that your labs are going to demonstrate how to do them. I'm partial to, I really like putting my helpers actually in my application controller. The reason for this is my application controller has access to my session. Whereas if you make your helpers in a concerns file, you have to pass in the session as an argument, which is still doable, but I just like to put them here. And so if I wanted this to live here instead, it would look something like, I just don't know why these are not lining up correctly, where we would find our wizard here. If we wanted this to be a better pattern, which means it doesn't access the database quite as many times, we use this really cool technique called memoization. And it would look something like this. And I think we talked about this in an earlier lab in Ruby. And what this does is it means that every time that we go to a route, to a get route, and we call current wizard, this code is only going to be run once, because it's only going to be run if we have not already looked up who the wizard is. And actually, you probably want to call this current wizard, because there's a chance that you might, like, this is a show page, so there's a chance that you actually want to find wizard one and let them be at wizard, and let your current wizard be someone else. You know, if you wanted to be Gen 12313 viewing stars page, or whoever that other person was that we made earlier. And so this is kind of the typical way that you'll see it. Another helper method that becomes really useful is just to check if they're logged in or not. And that you can honestly just check if they're logged in by checking if there's a wizard ID. Another way that we check is we actually check if there's a current wizard, because it is, in an odd case, it might be possible that there is a wizard ID, but it doesn't actually belong to a real wizard. It would be like someone hacking your website. It's not like an easy way. So the other way you can do it is you can just check to see if there's a current wizard. Great question, Jesse. So the nice thing is about these, because they're in a helpers do block, we have access to these in all of our controllers and in our views. We do not have access to them in the models. But so if we want to call them in our views, we actually just write the name of it. So it will look something like current wizard. And what we can actually do instead of this try thing I have here, also I know we're at time, so if you have to leave, I will not be offended if you jump off, is we can make like an if statement here that says if logged in, then we'll display this. And we'll only display it if we're logged in. Does that look right? The spacing is terrible, but we should still see it now. We shouldn't have changed anything yet. And then if we log out, that top part will disappear. And so this is where it's like really nice, is just if you write them in your application controller, you can easily access them anywhere. As long as they've been put in this helpers do block, this block is what's making them available to your views as well as your controller. Yes, it is a lot easier than a helpers class. Awesome. So that is all I have for you guys. Any last questions? I feel like I covered a lot. I'm sorry.
One quick question. Doesn't it need to be helpers.currentWizard then?
No. So that is if you have a helpers class.
Okay.
If you do them in your application controller and you do them in this block, they're available anywhere in your controllers or anywhere in your views.
Good to know.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks guys for being here, and I will upload the code and everything else to your GitHub place. So cool. Awesome. Bye guys.